Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Woolsey. I'm a member of the International Guild of Battlefield Guides, and I'm the owner-operator of Woolsey's War Walks. And tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about Operation Jubilee, the Dieppe raid, which took place the 19th of August, 1942. I need to give you this disclaimer, which is Military Family Services is not affiliated with any of the companies, apps, or products that I'm going to use or mention in this presentation. And they also don't sponsor or are not sponsored by them, and nor do they endorse any of the companies. Anything that I'm mentioning in this as companies or businesses or things like that are places that I recommend to you as a tour guide or places that I use as a tour guide so that you can plan your holiday and battlefield tour if you wish to go see those places in person. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to do a quick country overview. We're going to talk about some recommended preparations for a battlefield tour, travel advisories and things that are kind of important. Some helpful hints and words, very important when you're doing battlefield tours. Some must-try food and treats that are local to the area. The best places to stay, transportation issues and challenges. We're going to talk about Operation Jubilee, the big map. And then I'm going to talk about the 4 Canadian landing beaches, which is Blue Beach, Green Beach, Red and White beaches. Then I'm specifically talk about the tanks at Dieppe, and then of course the Canadian War Cemetery at Dieppe, because there's technically 2 cemeteries there, and we're going to talk about the Canadian one. So we are in France, and we are in the region of Normandy, Seine-Maritime. The population of Dieppe is 28,599 people, and of course they speak French. The main airport, kind of traveling internationally, would be Paris Charles de Gaulle. Quick background, it's first recorded as a small fishing settlement around 1030. Dieppe was an important prize fought over during the 100 Years' War, in fact. It's famous for its scallops, and Dieppe also has a very popular pebbled beach, which actually plays an important part of this battle. There's a 15th century castle, which was also involved in the battle, and the churches of Saint Jacques and Saint Remy. France is the 10th most expensive country in Europe, so its prices are kind of higher than the average for most European countries. And on July 23rd, 1632, 300 colonists heading for New France departed from Dieppe. The town also has one remaining city gate on its promenade called the Porte de Tourelle. So some of the original Canadians that came to New France came from the town of Dieppe. And so we have always had a connection to this place. So weather, Normandy, and Dieppe technically is in Normandy, is generally has a mild climate with wet, windy, and cool winters, but warm, dry summers. It's very much a beach town in the summertime. In the winter, it can be a little bit cold and blustery. The best time to travel really is kind of the end of April, beginning of May to the middle of November at the latest. It's kind of the best type of weather. Always bring a rain jacket. It's always a good idea. It helps with the wind. And last time I was in Dieppe, of course, it was exceptionally windy, and I was just there 2 weeks ago. So always a good idea, and good footwear, especially when you're walking the beaches of Dieppe. We think of a beach and it's nice and smooth and sandy. In this case, it's a very smooth type of pebble you'll see in the photos. So good footwear is really, really important. Always travel with medical insurance. You never want to be in that situation where you don't have it. All the memorials and places in Dieppe are child and animal friendly, in fact, and all the memorials are as well. But there are no city passes, unfortunately, in this town of Dieppe. So always go visit the Government of Canada travel advice for countries. France is a safe country, generally speaking. Petty crime is a risk. Generally, the area around Dieppe is safe, and most of northern France is quite safe. Dieppe does have its own hospital. The emergency number is 112, and your closest consulate is Paris. So some helpful tips. Always dress for the weather. It is close to the sea, so it can be chilly. It doesn't take much for the wind to blow up and become quite cool. So always really check your weather before you're visiting the battlefield here. Please don't climb on the monuments. That's exactly what they are. They are monuments. Some, in this case, have ashes spread around them as well in some locations, and they're considered sacred or consecrated ground. And that's common to most memorials, in fact. And you're also visiting someone's home. Most of the battlefield of Dieppe is literally the towns. And so remember this is where they live and work. And to keep us being able to visit without having any problems, please just respect the property, the memorials, and the kind of the rules of the area. It's really important. Dieppe is a really beautiful town, and we'd like to keep on going there without any problems. So some must-try food. Dieppe is infamous for its seafood, specifically its scallops. They're absolutely delicious. I can recommend two restaurants there. I had lunch at La Marine. It's actually both sides of the street. This is the one side. It does lunch and dinner. It's got great salads, lots of great seafood options, really great in price. Highly recommended. And Le New Haven, I had dinner there. It was an absolutely fabulous place. It was recommended by the hotel, and it was an absolutely delicious dinner for a really great price. And those are both actually not on the waterfront. They're actually in the harbor because the harbor in Dieppe is behind the beachfront. And I'll show it to you when we're on the map, kind of where it situates. And it's an easy walk around from the waterfront to the restaurants in the harbor. It's at most a 3-minute walk. So there's a couple of places to stay. I have stayed at the Hotel Mercure Dieppe La Présidence. It's beautiful. It's in the shadow of the castle. It is a more expensive option of hotels, but it is quite nice and it does have parking. It's also right beside the new casino. It is quite pleasant, but I found a new hotel that I would recommend a little bit more, which is the Hotel Windsor. So the Hotel Windsor is its parking is limited, which is not a problem because parking on the street is free. It's got a great breakfast. It's literally on the waterfront. It's 100 meters at most to the beach, and again, no more than 150, 200 meters back to the harbor front through the roads. It's a beautiful little place, and it was actually there during the battle. It's been a hotel since before the First World War. It's lovely. The rooms are clean, and I cannot recommend that hotel enough. It's also one of the best priced for being on the waterfront. So the Operation Jubilee. So Operation Jubilee, the Dieppe raid, was part of the 1942 raiding program, and it's the result of a very successful raid on the town of Saint-Nazaire that happened in March 1942. Its genesis and meandering creation and the development story take it from a simple raid to a complex one over a very short period of time at the Combined Operations Headquarters, the units that were the organization that was supposed to be planning all of the commando raids against Europe. The reason for the raid are shrouded in controversy and myth, but the main reasons for the raid were to show that the British were still committed to the Soviets by launching a major attack onto the Germans, to show the Americans our commitment to the invasion of France, and to prove if we could capture a port intact, which is a really critical item for the future invasion of Europe. The other interesting point of interest in this is that the battle that Operation Jubilee became happens to be at the exact same day that the Battle of Stalingrad started. So there's some political connection there. People have now suddenly kind of drawn that conclusion. There's lots of other theories espoused as to why it was created, but those are the kind of the main ones in the official histories. The original operation was supposed to be a flanking attack, i.e. forces attacking at Puy and Pourville and sweeping in behind to capture the town of Dieppe from behind and not having to storm the beachfront. They were going to have paratroopers attack the farther out batteries that might interfere with the landing forces. The plan, originally called Operation Rudder, also included tanks landing at the towns of Pourville and Puy to support the infantry. It had heavy bombers smashing the town of Dieppe and massive naval gunfire support. But as the concept was put to the service chiefs and their organizations, things began to change. The idea for the flank attack was changed to a frontal attack when it was put to Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery, who was the commander of Southeast Command, the man responsible for raising the forces for the operation. And he rightly pointed out that the bridges over the river Sea at Pourville had to be taken or the tanks would be trapped on the wrong side of the river and the attack would fail and they wouldn't get to Dieppe. This forced a change from the flanking attack onto a frontal attack at Dieppe with tanks and infantry hitting the town at the same time as infantry coming in on the flanks to support and take the headlands on the east and the west. The Air Force, of course, was worried about hitting the town of Dieppe with heavy bombers because of the civilian casualties, which was also something of great concern to the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. He wanted to avoid killing French civilians and not angering them. So the heavy air bombardment was switched to cannon-armed fighter bomber attacks onto the town itself with limited light bomber support of the operation. The Navy then also refused to send any big ships into the English Channel due to the German air threat, and so they only provided 6 destroyers with small 5-inch guns, reducing the fire support to this battle even more. The Canadians start getting involved at the very beginning with the commander of the 1st Canadian Corps, Lieutenant General Harry Crerar, politicking to get the Canadian Army into action, while the commander of the 1st Canadian Army, General Andrew McNaughton, did not want the forces split up or used on British adventures, which also fit in with the Prime Minister Mackenzie King's idea of not really doing anything to avoid casualties. In the end, Crerard got his way, and the 2nd Canadian Division was selected and began training in April 1942 at the Isle of Wight. Commanded by Major General John Hambleton Roberts, the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division was made up of the 4th, 5th, and 6th Canadian Infantry Brigades. For the purpose of this raid, only the 4th and 6th Brigades were selected and moved, along with the 14th Canadian Army Tank Battalion, then named Regiment, 2 weeks after being moved, to the Isle of Wight. So the 14th Army Tank Regiment is the Calgary Tanks, and they moved to the Isle of Wight for training. The 5th Brigade and all the other remaining units stayed in place in the United Kingdom and carried out exercises and other training. The training for this raid was going to be a problem, and it was a real challenge, as new equipment was being replaced at the same time as new ones were trying to be introduced. The Sten gun was brand new to the Canadian Army, and the Churchill tanks were coming out of refit and new to the Canadians. The men were not as fit as required. There had been some command challenges in the division, and that's why General Roberts had come in and he'd replaced a couple of brigade commanders because he had soldiers that weren't fit enough to march into battle. And the Navy crews were the worst part of it, as they were largely inexperienced and lacked firm direction from their chain of command. And on top of that, the Canadians and the Navy had to come up with new concepts for landing tanks and infantry on a beach and evacuating them after the battle was done. The original dates for the raid were supposed to be at the beginning of July, but due to bad weather, Operation Rudder was postponed, and then postponed again, and then finally canceled. And everyone thought that was the end of it. But sadly, it was not, as the Combined Operations Headquarters under Lord Louis Mountbatten turned the operation back on, with the plan to use the same forces, the exact same plan, with only the paratroopers being replaced by commandos landing by boat, and attacking all of the same objectives. They thought that the security of the operation would be maintained because it was the same troops. And the nice idea was, and it's a theory, that there would be no changes to the attacking force. The reality was men were posted in and out, some commanders got changed, and a lot of the equipment they trained on got turned in, and they were using their old equipment again. And they thought that the Germans would not believe that they would plan a second operation at the same target with the same plan after the first one had been canceled. And they were right, and nobody thought they would do it. When the raid was briefed and was turned back on for August and was briefed to the Canadian commanders, some were highly displeased. The men, in fact, were actually not told that until they were actually on their ships going over to Dieppe. They were told they were going on exercise, and one of the units, in fact, showed up loaded. It did not have its full ammunition allotment. It was discovered just before sailing, and they had to quickly load ammunition and find ammunition to get them so they had have enough for the battle. The only unit to write new orders for the battle was the 14th Canadian Armored Regiment, the Calgary Tanks, and their CO, Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Andrews, wrote a whole new order, but here's the only one that did. Every other order or every other instruction said same as rudder on all of the instructions. They just named it Operation Jubilee to give it a new name, and the force sailed on the 18th of August, 1942 from New Haven and into history. There are two commando raids on Yellow and Orange beaches, which I'm not going to cover, except for that the force at Yellow Beach ran into a small coastal convoy heading for Dieppe, got scattered, and then failed in its mission with terrible losses. This is the infamous convoy that supposedly gave away the action. Orange Beach, which is on the far side of Pourville, was a complete success in every way, even having one of the officers being awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions, and it was the only thing that went 100% right on the raid. Blue Beach at Puy. The Royal Regiment of Canada of the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade was assigned the task of storming Blue Beach at the village of Puy, a sleepy little seaside place with high cliffs on both sides and at the end of a narrow draw at the water's edge. They had with them some anti-aircraft and field artillery gunners whose objectives were to take over the captured weapons and use them in support of the raid. The Royal Regiment of Canada was under a brand new commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Doug Caddo, who was confident that there would be wire and other obstacles that they'd been told weren't going to be there, and so he arranged for Bangalore torpedoes and other breaching tools to be brought by his men. The men boarded their landing craft in the darkness, and as the flotilla formed up to take them ashore, some of the craft became disoriented and had to be gathered up by patrol boats for the run into the beach, delaying the force by some 20 minutes, costing them the darkness and the protection of the smoke screen laid by the Royal Air Force. To make up time, the landing craft commander sped up, leaving the slower landing craft mechanized, falling far behind, as the quicker landing craft assault with the infantry platoons racing ahead. And soon, the first and second waves were all mixed up, and as the craft approached the beach, the German defenders opened fire. The Germans were wide awake and ready, and not because of the convoy battle as often believed, but because the local commander had run an exercise that night, and upon hearing about the naval action, decided to run a second one to keep his troops fresh. And so the 60 defenders of Puy, 30 German Army troops and 30 German Air Force troops, were wide awake and in position when the Royals came in daylight. The Royal Regiment of Canada landed at Blue Beach at 5:07 a.m., and the beach was a complete disaster. Men were cut down, storming up the Chert Beach, which are these smooth stones you can see in this photo. And it was wet. Plus, there was a 12-foot high seawall topped with thick barbed wire, as Caddo had thought, and it was, as I said, was unreported. The second group came in after the first with the same results, men piling up by the seawall in attempts to get over and into the village. Only 20 men actually made it, with its commanding officer, Doug Caddo, leading the way. They pushed to the east headland and finally surrendered at about 4 p.m., well after the best of the battle was over. And they'd moved into a forest to try to figure out what to do next. Of the group, one of the officers actually did escape and made it all the way back to England many months later. Sadly, Blue Beach, there was no evacuation, although there was an attempt during the main evacuation at about 11 a.m. But as the ships came in to shore, no life could be seen on the beach, and so it was called off. And it was in fact likely that the fighting had actually ended almost 3 hours earlier at 8:30 a.m. The Royal Regiment had landed 556 men at Puy and lost 227 killed, 264 captured, with only 65 men making it back to the United Kingdom. They had actually touched down on the beach, but their landing craft had been heavily damaged and the door was damaged, and pulled off the beach. The men were unable to offload, and that's why they were the only men to get off that beach. This is the highest Canadian casualties of the raid, and is also the greatest single-day loss of any Canadian unit during the entire war. The photo on the right, you can actually stand at that staircase. It's now partially cemented over, and the beach is much higher now. The church is piled up. Normandy has reverse erosion. A lot of this stuff gets pushed up onto the beach by sucked away from the beach because it's this smooth stones. Those are the fallen soldiers of the Royal Regiment of Canada against the seawall. And you can see on the very top of it a lot of the barbed wire. It pretty much remains unchanged. That all looks almost identical today. On the other two photos, one is one of the German bunkers that was there defending Dieppe. You can see it in some of the photos of the Dieppe raid at Puy, and the other is the memorial at Puy today to the Royal Regiment of Canada. So there's also, if you look at the house in the left-hand photo, that house still stands, and in the very front of it, there's actually a German bunker that was part of the battle. That bunker still exists as well today. They turned it into their garden shed. It's on private land. You can't visit that one, but you can visit the one by the memorial. Green Beach at Portville. The South Saskatchewan Regiment, a 6th Canadian Brigade, landed at Green Beach and was the mostly successful part of the Canadian operations that day, landing pretty much on time at 4:52 a.m. The regiment stormed ashore and surprised the German defenders. One part that went wrong, though, was that the landing craft put men from different companies on the wrong side of the River Sea from their company objectives. This meant that they had to try to cross the only bridge in town, which was under observation and from German defenders on the high ground called a headland. And so they needed to get there and capture it. But the men landed on the wrong side of the river, had to storm the bridge, and then get up the hill to try to get to the Germans. Soon the bridge was piled with the dead and dying men who had tried to cross it, halting the South Saskatchewan's attack inland. Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Merritt, the commanding officer, was at his headquarters near the beach, came forward and took charge, walking onto the bridge, waving his helmet in his hand and leading men across the bridge one group at a time, completely oblivious to the ferocious German fire. He then led attacks against the Germans on the high ground, leading to some of them being cleared. His efforts and leadership, unfortunately, could not get the unit to all of its objectives. The Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, also of 6th Canadian Brigade, came ashore after the South Saskatchewan men, landing 30 minutes late because their commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Alf Gosling, had asked for it. He actually wanted to only be about 10 minutes late because he felt that the South Saskatchewans would need more time to clear the objectives. As he stepped off his landing craft, to the sound of his regiment's bagpipes, he was struck down and killed. Unfortunately, His landing also was mixed up on both sides, as Major A.T. Law, the deputy commander, took command. The group on the west side then joined the South Saskatchewan Regiment, while the main body under Major Law moved inland towards their objectives, a farm and hopefully an airfield. They made it farther inland than any other unit that day. But by 9:30 that morning, Major Law had pulled out his force back to Pourville, and there they were informed that an evacuation is going to take place at 11 a.m. The boats arrived on time to Green Beach, but the South Saskatchewan and Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders suffered terribly during the evacuation, with many wounded, but they were protected by a valiant rear guard led by Lieutenant Colonel Merritt. This meant that a good number of men actually made it off the beach, including Major Law. But the rear guard was eventually captured when they had run out of ammunition, and there were no more boats coming in to rescue the survivors. It was a much less messy battle at Pourville, with the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders taking 76 casualties and the South Saskatchewan only 84. For his bravery throughout the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt was awarded the Victoria Cross, one of 2 for Canada that day. Today, at Pourville, there are 3 memorials to the Canadians. The first one is near where the rear guard fought at the end and the headquarters of the South Saskatchewan Regiment, and it's from 1946. There are 2 at the church in town, one to Canadians in general and one specifically to the South Saskatchewan Regiment. The last one is actually Merritt's Bridge, which was named in honor of Lieutenant Colonel Merritt, BC. While it is not the original bridge, it is in the original spot. Red Beach. The Essex Scottish, a 4th Canadian Brigade, was given the mission to storm Red Beach and take part of the town of Dieppe. They had to get across the promenade, which was wide open and exposed for fire from both headlands, and a cemented French tank on part of the harbor. The unit landed at 5:25 a.m. to heavy German fire, 30 minutes after the raids had begun at Puy and Pourville, so the Germans were very much awake. Casualties were staggering, and by 5:45, they had taken almost 40% casualties. Men were cut down as they tried to get across the promenade and into the town, about 100 yards of open ground, although one party did get across, led by CSM Cornelius Stapleton. Minutes after landing, Sergeant Major Stapleton led a dozen or so men into the buildings on the Boulevard de Verdun and through to the harbor, fighting the entire time. Eventually, they were cut off, cut down, or overrun, with Stapleton making it back to the beach and reporting to his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Jasperson, of his actions. He was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his bravery. The Essex on Red Beach did complete one of their objectives, which was to destroy the tobacco factory, today a modern hotel. Firing from the beach, they used rifle grenades, which lit the building on fire, destroying it. It was suspected to hold German ammunition. In fact, it only held tobacco. By 9 a.m., with the casualties mounting and the supporting tanks that had landed on Red Beach trying to get off of the beach, the evacuation of the assault forces was again ordered for 11 a.m. The evacuation here was not smooth and involved even more losses, including the capture of the commanding officer, Colonel Jasperson. Of the 553 men that the Essex landed that day, only 51 returned to the United Kingdom, with 121 killed, 27 wounded, and 388 captured. So there's a monument to a memorial to the Essex Scottish on Red Beach. It's actually it matches the one that's in Windsor, at the commemorative park in Windsor, and that is the one on Red Beach. And they've put a couple like that in other places where the Essex Scottish have fought. The center picture is the defenses looking from White Beach down across Red Beach, and you can see how thick. That's what the men had to try to get over and through to get to the promenade on the right-hand side of the photo. And the top right-hand photo is a look from the cliffside looking over Red and White Beach. The Royal Hamilton Light Infantry at White Beach. They landed on the western side of Dieppe, coming ashore about 5:25 a.m., just like the Essex, and again without their supporting tanks. But unlike Red Beach, White Beach was dominated by the remains of a casino, which had been fortified by the Germans, but unfortunately was also in the middle of being demolished. This was helpful to the Hamilton men, as it gave them protection from the defenders from the West Headland and allowed them to get across to the Boulevard to Verdun and into the town under much more cover. When the RHLI landed, murderous fire poured into them, soon pinning them down against the thick seawall. But eventually, they broke into the casino and began clearing it out of Germans. It was also from here that at least 2 small groups broke into Dieppe. including the only officer from the regiment to return to England unwounded. His name is Captain Dennis Whitaker. He later commanded the unit in Northwest Europe and became a brigadier after the war, but more importantly, he's a former member of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He also wrote several books, including one on Dieppe that you can find today. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Labatt of the Labatt Brewing family, was handed command of the 4th Canadian Infantry Brigade when their brigadier, Brigadier Sherwood Lett, was wounded on one of the tank landing craft, and he never was able to land. Labatt was heard to comment that the silliness of taking over command of a brigade that wasn't doing anything. The attack on a White also stalled, even though some of the tanks actually got onto the promenade here, and some of the wounded were sheltering inside a damaged landing craft that was beached. It's called Tank Landing Craft 5, which also was in front of the casino. It's the one that's burning in the top photo. During the battle, Padre John Foote of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry constantly gave first aid to the wounded, exposing himself to rescue wounded soldiers from the beach, and during the evacuation, after helping load the wounded onto the last boat, jumped off and waded ashore to stay with the wounded, earning the 2nd Victoria Cross of the day for Canada, and being the first and only Padre so honored. The evacuation from White Beach did have one distinct advantage other than the casino, and that was that as the tanks came off the promenade, they returned to cover the infantry withdrawal. In a scene that is often repeated, men rushed to the landing craft, some carrying wounded, others just trying to get away, leading to the loss of many landing craft. But in the end, 211 members of the regiment returned to the United Kingdom from an attacking force of 582. They did lose 197 killed, 109 wounded, and 174 captured. Today, the casino is gone, replaced by a large aquatic facility and park, and it has much changed on the promenade here. But the memorial is to the RHLI is once where the casino stood. So that's the casino, or that's the memorial to the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. It's by far the simplest of all the memorials on the beach. The top photo is the defenses looking towards, from the gap between Red and White Beach, looking towards the casino, which is in the left-hand side of the corner. And that's one of the tanks that was covering the defenses. And as I said, that's Tank Landing Craft 5 that many of the wounded were sheltering behind. That's the one burning in the background. And in the bottom photo, you can see it's still smoking. That's Tank Landing Craft 5. And you can see some of the Churchill tanks, how they were forming up to help get infantry protection. And guns are all but one facing towards the German defenders. The floating reserve was the Fusilier Mont Royal of 6th Brigade under Lieutenant Colonel Dolan Menard. They were ordered to come ashore at 7 a.m. in some unarmored landing craft under the false belief that they were going to have success and the troops were in the town. Dispersed by enemy fire, some of them landed under the cliffs of the West Headland on the far side of White Beach, while others landed in between Red and White Beaches, with Menard being hit 5 separate times from the moment he touched down. The men of the Fusilier Royal made no difference at all to the battle, as the men trapped under the headland were completely unable to get up and around and move from where they were, and the men in the middle of Red and White Beaches could not cross the promenade, although at one point it was believed that some of them may have. It was later proved to be a false report. In total, 584 Fusiliers landed, and only 125 returned. They suffered 199 killed and 344 captured. Their CO, Lieutenant Colonel Menard, was the only actual commanding officer that landed to make it back to the UK, badly wounded. His war in Europe was over. He actually ended up commanding the brigade in the Aleutians Island campaign in 1943. Today, the Fusilier Mont Royal have a memorial where Red and White Beaches meet along the seawall. So that's the Fusilier Mont Royal Memorial. So those are both photos of the beaches. So that's from the juncture of Red and White Beach looking up towards White Beach and the castle, and the others looking down Red Beach. And you can see kind of how big some of the spaces are. Those are both the low tide photos, but you can see some of the rocks in the top photo. You can see the hump of where the rocks actually form. I'm on the sand in that photo. It was quite the significant challenge. The tanks at Dieppe. The 14th Canadian Army Tank Regiment, the Calgary Regiment, was equipped with the Churchill infantry tank and were meant to arrive with the infantry on Red and White Beaches at the exact same time. They were to land in 4 waves, each of 3 landing craft, each carrying 3 tanks and either a scout car, a jeep, or a bulldozer. Led by Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Andrews, the regiment was well trained and well prepared for the battle. The tanks coming ashore were a mix of the Mark I, which had a 2-pounder gun and a 3-inch howitzer in the hull to be a close support tank, the Mark II, which had a 2-pounder gun and a machine gun in the hull, and the Mark III, which was the latest version with a 6-pounder gun and a machine gun in the hull. Each had a crew of 5, and they were to help clear the town, and then some of the tanks were to move out and help the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders taking their inland objectives, including the airstrip. The tank landing craft arrived late, landing the tanks late sometime around 5:35 a.m., which meant that the infantry had been alone and unsupported for up to 10 minutes, and their attacks completely stalled. The tanks also faced challenges on the beach, with many breaking their tracks thanks to the smooth, hard stone called chert, which jammed into their tracks, snapping them. 2 tanks disembarked into deep water, including the tank of Lieutenant Colonel Andrews, which was called Regiment, as he had tried for over an hour to come ashore. He escaped his sunken tank, but was unfortunately killed while he was trying to get ashore. Those tanks that did land, 27 in all, generally made great contributions to the battle. If they were immobilized on the beach, they kept firing at targets until they were forced to surrender or out of ammunition. But some of the tanks, and one scout car, actually made it up onto the promenade and drove around for most of the battle. In fact, 15 tanks made it up, drove up and down, shooting up German positions, houses, and bunkers. One fell into an underground bunker in the middle of the promenade, which was quite shocking to the crew, and 2 were hit by air attack. One lost its track by shellfire near the casino. Its name was Bert, which is in the photos below. Sadly, they couldn't actually get into the town itself because the engineers needed to destroy the German obstacles were stuck on the beach. And so after running up and down for most of the battle, they withdrew to the beach to recover the evacuation. The tanks fought until the very end to protect the infantry. No tank crewmen were killed in their tanks, but some were killed after evacuating from them, 3 actually from drowned tanks. And a testament to the strength of the Churchill, none of the tanks were penetrated by German fire. Of the 417 men of the Calgary tanks that were supposed to land, 247 returned, but only 3 of those were troops that had actually landed on the beach. All 3 had been evacuated as wounded. The remainder were in the tanks that didn't land and the support troops that did not come ashore. They were actually turned away at about 9 o'clock in the morning, much to the displeasure of the deputy commanding officer. On the beach itself, the regiment lost a total of 13 men killed and 33 wounded. The remainder, 138, were all captured at the very end of the battle when they were ordered to surrender. The Germans captured all the vehicles that had landed, but most of the tanks were destroyed by their crews as they abandoned them, and only 2 were able to be recovered because they were having infantry shelter and the tank crews did not want to put the infantry at risk. And so they were recovered and used by the Germans. One was Bert, which was knocked out by the casino, and the one was Blondie. They're both Mark III tanks with the 6-pounder guns. Today, the Calgary tanks have a memorial between red and white beaches as well, as they technically landed on both. And their memorial is pretty unique because it has the King's Own Cavalry Regiment's badge on it, which is the new name for the regiment, and a picture of the tanks forming the defensive perimeter, like in all of the photos, and has the names of all the killed in action on it. Dieppe Canadian War Cemetery is outside of the town and was built by the Germans after the battle. It is built in their custom, and so it's very different from the Canadian cemeteries that you generally see in the Second World War, with headstones being head to head. Not all of the fallen are here, as some of the wounded who later died were taken to Calais to a military hospital and are commemorated there, and those that died of wounds that were evacuated were buried in Brookwood Military Cemetery in the United Kingdom, and those that were unknown are commemorated on the Brookwood 1939 to 45 memorial. There's also some of the soldiers that died as prisoners of war are buried in some of the German prisoner of war camps in some of the cemeteries inside of Germany, specifically Cologne. The cemetery has some Battle of France burials as well, because there was fighting there in 1940, including the highest ranking in there is a brigadier general from the Salvation Army. She was killed in an air attack. And there are some aircrew from various years of the war, including an Indian Air Force pilot. In total, there are 582 Canadians, 174 British, 4 New Zealanders, 3 Poles, 1 Australian, and 1 Indian. And there are also 187 unknowns in the cemetery for a total of 948 commemorations. The highest ranking officer here is Lieutenant Colonel Alf Gosling from the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. The youngest are 3 privates, 2 from the Essex Scottish and 1 from the Fusilier Mont Royal, and 1 trooper from the Calgary Tanks, Trooper Olfie. They're all 18. And the oldest is a private from the Essex Scottish. He was 50 years old when he landed and was killed. Operation Jubilee was a complete disaster. And not just for the Canadian Army. The Royal Air Force had hoped to draw the Luftwaffe into a massive air battle to inflict a crushing defeat, but by the end of the day, 106 airplanes had been lost by the RAF, with 62 killed, 30 wounded, and 17 captured, against the loss of 48 aircraft by the Germans. The Royal Navy also took terrible losses, with 550 killed and wounded, 1 destroyer sunk, and 33 landing craft, including 4 tank landing craft, lost, to the Germans losing 1 patrol vessel. In total, the Canadian Army lost 907 killed, 2,460 wounded, and 1,946 captured. Many of those were the wounded, along with losing 29 tanks and 7 scout cars. The British Army lost 247 killed, mostly Army commandos at both of the beaches, as well as one that tried to run in with the Fusilier Mont-Royal. And the US Army, in its combat debut, lost 3 killed, 5 wounded, and 3 captured out of 50 who participated across all the different landing beaches. The controversy after the battle was that the commander of the 6th Canadian Infantry Brigade, Brigadier Bill Southam, was captured with a copy of an operations order that stated that German prisoners' hands were to be shackled, leading to both sides shackling prisoners of war for the next year. That order was supposed to have that comment removed, as ordered by General Roberts, but the staff officer that was supposed to remove it decided against it, and that's why this controversy happened, and many Canadians remained in shackles for 13 months. The raid stirs many deep emotions in Canada today, and is still very contentious and controversial. It did prove that the Allies were not ready to cross the Channel invasion, and it did drive the creation of the Mulberry Artificial Harbor and its development. The creation of specialized armored vehicles such as the Churchill funnies to breach obstacles and get off the beach, and better planning and intelligence, all of which helped the invasions of North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and eventually D-Day. I hope you get the opportunity to go visit Dieppe. It's a wonderful town that you can do a battlefield tour in one day. You can drive in, see all the beaches, and enjoy a wonderful evening in Dieppe. Thank you for your time.